Hello guys, we're Tom and Chris, we are Those Film Guys.
And welcome to the final instalment of our Lord of the Rings and Unexpected Marathon. Today we'll be covering the final chapter in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King.
The Return of the King.
So, how would you like to start this off? What would you like to go into first?
Ooh.
The final epic instalment.
Final epic. I do not physically know where to start.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Certainly the tone for this film is a lot different to the other two. So we get an extended flashback sequence of Deagle and Smeagol, and Smeagol's transformation into Gollum over the years as the ring corrupts him. And I remember when I went to see this for the first time in 2003 being a little creeped out by this, because the start is very dark, and especially when we see Smeagol in mid-transformation, some of the makeup effects and everything, and yeah, it's a bit of a grisly scene to watch, especially when he's eating like raw fish and everything.
It is, and you know, it just makes him that much more tragic a character, because you look at you know, it's very simple Hobbit, and it's like you know, you wouldn't wish something like that to happen to someone. No, and I think you do get that a good sense of that.
I think it's a fitting scene to begin the film as well, because obviously this is ultimately Frodo's story, taking this ring. So I think showing this at the start kind of shows what could happen to Frodo if he doesn't complete this task, and if he becomes corrupted by the ring, what he could turn into. Yeah,
I mean, in this film, he is almost taken over by it.
He is in bad shape from the beginning.
And I think it's good to sort of hint that Frodo is in this transformation period of being corrupted, by showing the Smeagol transformation into Gollum.
Yeah, and there's a scene towards the beginning of the film which I really like between Sam and Frodo. It's where Frodo's asking for something to eat, and Sam says that he's having to ration the food for the journey home, and Frodo gives this look back to Sam. There's no words, but you can tell that he doesn't think there's going to be a return journey home, that he doesn't think they'll be able to make it. They're so close, but it's the final push, and because the ring is getting closer to its master in the place where it was made, it's taking its toll on Frodo. And really, the character of Sam, I think, in this film, I mean, obviously Aragorn, the Return of the King, comes back and like has the biggest character arc, but certainly Sam, for me, stands out in this one out of all three.
Yeah, he does.
Because as Frodo grows weaker, he has to step up as his companion and help him through it.
I mean, it all is essentially, the last film is all about friendship. And not abandoning your friends, because what happens in this... I lost my train of thought there, but what happens in Return of the King is that Sam... There's a scene in it where, and you know, spoilers. There's a scene in it where Sam gets cast away. And it's very, very touching. But he decides not to abandon his friend because he knows he's going into certain danger when he sees the bread on the cliffside that's been sprinkled down. And at the end, Aragorn doesn't abandon Frodo and Sam by going up to the Black Gate and getting a distraction for them. And it's just not abandoning your friends. And you know, Gimli and Legolas have that moment that you've been building up to throughout each of the films.
At the Black Gate.
At the Black Gate, where it's Gimli says never, or something along the lines of, thought I'd never be...
I never thought I'd die standing side by side with an elf.
Yeah.
What about standing side by side with a friend?
Yeah. And it is essentially all about the friendship these guys have built over the previous films. Sam comes into his own, and he really is, I think, probably the one character you like most in the film. I mean, The who you like most in the film? I mean, Pippin and Faramir have a little friendship going along as well.
It's built up more in the extended cut, but it's certainly the character of Faramir in this one. In the second one, you may have thought you're not too sure of this character, but you see his father Denethor in this, who's the steward of Gondor, and man, he treats Faramir rough in this film.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Basically, Faramir, the brother to Boromir, Faramir was kind of the shunned child out of the two brothers. Denethor really favoured Boromir as the favoured son, and you kind of see Faramir wanting to try and win his father's acceptance. And there's this great scene, which is one of my favourite scenes of film of all time. It's where Faramir has lost this city of Gondor, this area of Gondor, Osgiliath, and his father's basically absolutely crazy as the steward of Gondor. He basically sends a handful of guys out to retake this part of Gondor when it's completely overrun by the enemy orcs.
Yeah.
And Pippin sings this song, and it's apart from this song, it's all in silence. We get like echoes of like the battle, and it's just Faramir riding with his troops. He knows he's going to his end, and he doesn't die in this scene, but it's all moments like this in Return of the King. It really ramps up the emotional stakes.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it's building up to a more grand scale. You had it building in Two Towers, that sort of bigger scale, much more epic. But here it is ramped up to it's ramped up to 11. Like you have probably the most epic scale battle on the Pelennor field, subsequently in Minas Tirith as well, and it is very, very jaw dropping. To watch it all play out, to watch this final film play out and gradually get further to the end. You don't want it to end, really.
No.
You just want to stay there with the characters in Middle Earth, because it feels real and it feels lived in. Like I said in the Fellowship of the Ring review, it feels lived in, and you really don't want to leave it.
No, and some may say that the final film goes on too long. I think the extended cut comes to about 4 hours, 20 minutes, about there. But man, that time flies by so quickly.
Yeah.
And you could say with the Fellowship and Two Towers, if you go and buy the DVDs, the first disc out of the two is more set up towards big things, but the Return of the King follows suit with that, but we do get a big epic scale battle in that first part, which was kind of lacking in the other two for obvious reasons, for story reasons. But this one, doesn't stop. It keeps the actions all sprinkled throughout, but it's offset with this journey of Sam and Frodo as they're getting closer to their destination, and Gollum's the deceitful one out of the two of them. And Aragorn, the Return of the King, he finally comes to term and accepts his destiny of becoming the King of Gondor.
Yeah, the whole scale thing I've touched on. It's but within that scale is very real people and real human beings, real characters that are three-dimensional. And I think as well, you have the dynamic. But there are so many elements to this one we could touch on. I'm thinking we'll be here all day if we did. You've also got the thing with the juxtaposition with Denethor and Theoden, where in the Two Towers, Theoden pretty much exiles, not from his will, but he's lost his son, much like Denethor has, but he is willing to do more about it, not give up hope that he will become or fight for what he believes in. Denethor just gives up completely, just sort of locks himself, becomes cold.
He goes so insane, he goes to set his one remaining son on fire alive, along with himself. And one thing I like about those two characters as well is that moment where Theoden says that no one came to their aid in the second film during the Helm's Deep battle. Gondor never came to the aid of Rohan.
Yeah.
But he puts that aside because he knows that this is the final push to like withstand the enemy.
Yeah.
So he puts all this aside and he goes to Gondor's rescue.
Yeah.
In hugely spectacular fashion at the end. The final charge of Rohan against the enemy is that scene just gives me chills every time I watch it, even to this day.
It's awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
To watch. You know, you just watch all these sequences and you just think how they made this on a scale of below $100 million budget. I think each film was about, they had 300 million to play with for each film. They split it up into 100 million each or thereabouts.
Yeah.
I mean, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen had a budget of 200 million on one film. This has 100 million on one film, you know, and
it shows.
it doesn't.
Michael Bay spent all the money on fancy special effects.
Yeah.
But Lord of the Rings shows you can have special effects as long as you have character and a good story and emotion.
Yeah.
Which is completely lacking in Transformers.
Well, it is.
But what I meant was, it shows that you don't have to have a huge budget to make a great film.
No, you don't. I think that is what's really lacking in Transformers. That and Michael Bay can't direct at all.
One thing I would like to say, we didn't cover this in the Two Towers review, but Gandalf's return as Gandalf the White in the second film. The second film he kind of appears, but I think that was kind of spoiled in the trailer for the Two Towers. I think in most people who aren't familiar with the books, that the surprise of Gandalf's survival was kind of taken away. But he was kind of absent for most of that film. He only showed up at the end to rescue the heroes in their moment of need. Here, I like to see him taking more of a military stand. There's a scene where Denethor basically sees the enemy army advancing on the city of Minas Tirith, and he just says, flee for your lives, we're not going to match this. And then Gandalf steps in, and he leads the soldiers of Gondor.
Yeah. He takes charge.
Now that's mostly his entire role in that film, to be honest. And I really like that aspect of Gandalf. He is a wizard, but he really doesn't use that much magic. He is
well, I think it's toned down magic. I mean, he's not the sort of wizard that was zap people.
Just blasting spells over it.
Yeah, because then what's the point in the actual fighting to begin with? He can
It would kind of overpower him as well, because we only really see him use magic in this film where there's an extended scene which wasn't in the theatrical cut, which I think was a really big problem in the theatrical cut, was the absence of Saruman. We never really got any closure to that character outside of the Two Towers. We just had to assume that he stayed in the Tower of Orthanc for the rest of his days. But we get an extended scene where Gandalf arrives to Isengard and has an extended exchange of dialogue with Saruman and Death of Saruman. Now, some fans of the book complain that this is too different to the book because there's a whole part at the end where Saruman's gone back to the Shire and taken that for himself. But I really don't think that was needed for the story to play out. And I think it's fitting that Saruman dies here because it shows that Gandalf is now powerful and the wizard that Saruman should have been. And although the death of Saruman, you could say, is a triumph of good over the evil, Sauron is the main enemy of this film.
And I think that whole sequence at the end of the Return of the King, the book, it just, Pete Jackson himself said that, you know, you can't have like the characters finish their journey, they've gone through all this peril just to return home, and everything's been taken over, we've gone into like Nazi occupied France. You know, you just can't have that. It
kind of derailed the epic ending of the final Black Gate stone. Yeah. And speaking of the Black Gate, there's another extended scene which I think should have been kept in the theatrical cut, where they have a confrontation with the Mouth of Sauron. The Mouth of Sauron is basically this evil guy who's the voice of Sauron. He is the one who delivers the terms, and he's kind of trying to corrupt and demoralise the good side by saying that Frodo has been killed, your cause is lost, just give up, join the evil side. And you kind of see the look of horror on all the people's faces, like Gandalf's looking like he's going to give up the Hobbit. But Aragorn just walks up like a badass and just cuts his head off and says, "I'm not going to believe it," and he makes the final stand against the enemy.
Yeah. See, I don't think that really should have been in the. It's a nice scene to look at, but it realistically, in the books, you got one part Aragorn. The last time you saw Frodo was in the Two Towers, and the mouth of Sauron comes in. You don't know what's happened to Frodo, so having that mithril chainmail or the mithril jacket being thrown at them sort of weighs you down more in the book than it does in the film, because you've seen Frodo walking up to Mount Doom.
I think the effect on the characters is stronger in this event in the films, but I think in terms of the audience, it's better in the books. I'm not a fan of the books, but that is an area that's better, especially because we literally see Frodo like 5 minutes before this scene, so we know he's fine, so there's not really any tension there.
Yeah. But another thing I quite like the change of, because I mean, was the placement of Shelob, the Great, because it was supposed to be in the Two Towers, but you can't really have that in there cut together with action sequence of Helm's Deep.
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked.
But and that's why they put them going to Osgiliath, Faramir going to Osgiliath and stuff in, because that doesn't happen in the book, obviously, but they needed that. I think without that in the last film, not very much would have happened,
and certainly you wouldn't have seen that change and development in Sam's character, because there's this. He takes on Shelob. Shelob's basically this gigantic spider that resides just outside of Mordor. And Frodo is stung by the spider and Sam assumes it dead. But Sam comes into his own, comes back to Frodo's rescue and takes on and kills... Well, no, he doesn't kill, does he? He just subdues this gigantic spider. And then when Frodo's taken to the enemy side and is held prisoner by the orcs, Sam just walks in and just takes on orcs and Uruk-hai, and it's just fantastic to watch, because at this point, you as a viewer are just rooting for Sam, because he is brilliant. And there's one scene, actually, I'm not sure if it's in the book, but I really like when Sam comes to Frodo's aid, and he's took the ring, because Frodo's been taken to the tower. He's taken the ring himself to keep it safe, and Frodo asks for it back, but there's this kind of eerie moment where Sam kind of wants to keep the ring for himself because it looks like it's starting to corrupt him. I like that aspect of the character, because it shows that even though he has stuck by Frodo for all this time, the ring is so powerful, especially being near to the place it was created, that it's taken over this character as well.
There are so many notable scenes in this. Like for example, the scene before, I think the charge towards Osgiliath, where Denethor just says to Faramir that, or Faramir says to Denethor that you wish that, or something along the lines of, you wish that
I had died
and Boromir had lived, and then he says or says yes. Essentially, it's moments like that that just make it more emotional. Makes the emotional weight of it more powerful. And there's a whole great scene which was cut out as well, which was the Houses of Healing, which is in the extended cut. And there's so many good scenes in this, so many, and it has a great song as well.
One of the main emotional moments for me is an exchange between Pippin and Gandalf, and it's during the Battle of Minas Tirith when all seems lost. I think it's when the enemy's broken in and it looks like they're all going to lose. And they talk about the concept of death, and Gandalf kind of comforts Pippin, who is scared of death. And he's like explaining there's a beauty in it, because obviously Gandalf the Grey died fighting the Balrog, but then was reborn as Gandalf the White, so he has experienced death. And man, that part, it really gets to you. And certainly the last I'd say the last 40 minutes of this film is just an emotional roller coaster. The final push with Sam and Frodo making their way up to Mount Doom, and the aftermath of all that. And I've heard some people say that whole part. I remember going to the cinema to see this in 2003, where they're climbing up the mountain, and it takes ages for them to get to the top. And you're kind of just saying, you see, like, come on, destroy the ring, hurry up, get it done. But I like that aspect of it, that it's delayed, and you feel like they're so close to their destination, to completing their quest, yet so far, and it's that final push.
And you really do feel that when they get up, you really root for them, and you really go, come on, you can do it. And then when they fall on that slope, it's like, oh, this is going to be it, they're not going to make it.
Yeah. And
which I haven't... Which the only other time I felt like that is in Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah.
In the this spoiler if you haven't played it, in the sequence where Snake is walking through the tunnel of like radiation, you're sat in there going, come on, not gonna make it. You feel like that.
Yeah.
That is the only other time I felt sort of like that in a film.
And then they eventually get to their destination, and Frodo's, holding the ring over the lava in Mount Doom, and all he has to do is just let go and drop it, and there's a heartbeat sound, and the music's making that kind of screech that plays when Sauron's close, and you're shouting with Sam like, throw the ring into the lava, get the quest done. And then of course Gollum shows up, he has to at the end, try one last ditch effort to try and take the ring back, and Frodo doesn't drop the ring into the lava. He's been corrupted by it. He decides to do what everyone else has done with the ring, never destroy it. Puts the ring on, goes invisible. Sauron now knows where he is. And then Gollum jumps in to try and get the ring, bites Frodo's finger off. And the look of happiness on Gollum's face here is just brilliant to watch. He, after all these years of being absent from the ring, he finally has it. And I've heard some people, when Gollum's basically pushed into the lava, he has a small fight with Frodo, which ends with Gollum falling into the lava. And I've heard that it's a not very realistic reaction to falling into a pit of lava, because you would be screaming in pain. But I think it shows that Gollum, even in death, is still transfixed with this ring and is just unfazed by the pain, and his sheer focus to try and get the ring.
Yeah, I think so as well. And one of my gripes with it, I guess, would be the length of the ending itself. I think it does run on for a good, half hour more than it should.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most talked about areas of the Return of the King, is the length in its ending.
It could have been cut by about 20 minutes, and things could have been wrapped up a lot quicker, because you do spend another part in the Shire, and it just feels, even though I can sit there and watch it, it does start to wear out its welcome, in my opinion.
I remember seeing this, and the film constantly fades to black.
Yeah.
The music fades out, and you think, oh, is that the end? And honestly, the audience, myself included, got up to leave from this film about 5 times. Because it constantly teases that it's the end, but another scene always comes on.
Yeah.
And there's probably the most emotional scene in this for me is at the very end, is where the coronation of Aragorn, when he becomes finally the King of Gondor, and everyone's clapping and cheering the new king, and the hobbits are there and bow to Aragorn, and he just says, "My friends, you bow to no one," and the music swells.
Yeah.
And part of me kind of wishes that was the final scene.
Yeah.
But although I can understand the criticism that the ending goes on for about half hour after this point, I can't think of any scene that could be cut out and not have an effect, because I like the effect of the hobbits going back to the Shire. They have been on this quest, they've experienced all these things, the sense of loss and sacrifice, and they go back to the Shire and no one has been fazed by it. They're not even aware that this event went on.
Yeah.
And I think Frodo says it like, you can't go on living after you've experienced all this. I can't remember the exact words, but it's to the effect of you can't go on with a normal life after explaining this. So Frodo then sees that he has to leave this world because nothing will be the same again, and it's kind of left to the other hobbits, Sam especially included, to carry on. the adventures, and
Mm.
that entire ending shot is just the most emotionally impactful, I'd say.
Yeah. Probably the most emotional scene for me is probably right at the very beginning of the film, where it's an exchange between Aragorn and Eowyn. It's in the extended cut of the film, where she's asleep on a couch or a bed or something, and he comes over, and she just describes the darkness the darkness that enthralled her dream, and that scene to me is a really good sort of counter to what the threat is at the moment, the threat to the natural world, the threat to all things beautiful and all things grand, and it's just the industrialist movement of sound just coming towards them. And also I think House of Healing is also probably my favourite scene, even though it was cut from the theatrical release. As well, what else do you want to touch on?
Very briefly, Legolas's final badass moment.
Yeah. This
got the entire audience at my viewing in applause, and that's the only applause I've ever witnessed at a film. He takes on an Oliphant. For those of you who don't know, an Oliphant is basically what it says it is. It's a gigantic elephant-like creature from the deserts of Middle-earth. Legolas takes down this entire Oliphant and all of the people, all the soldiers on top of it, single-handedly.
Yeah.
And it's... Some people, again, would argue that Legolas is way too overpowered, but this scene is awesome.
Yeah. I think that became a recurring thing as well in the films. Each film you had to have Legolas do something cool.
You had to constantly ramp it up.
And I think the exchange as well afterwards of Gimli saying that still only counts as one is fantastic.
That element of competition between the two still remaining strong, even though they could all die in this battle.
Yeah, they're still having that banter. They're still having fun with it. And I as well, musical score as well. We keep touching on the music, but it is probably a character in itself.
Yeah,
and it deserves its own special category.
Can't imagine this film without the music at all, or any other music.
Or without Howard Shore.
Yeah,
because I mean, he really makes it his own, and he really pulls out all the stops for this final piece. So I think pretty much I have touched on pretty much everything I want to say. I mean, this is a film I would recommend to everybody, and I will of course take it. It's not for everybody. If you don't like fantasy, you won't like it. But it's still worth a watch. It's so big, so epic, so grand that you just don't want it to end.
And it honestly doesn't fall into the trap of the third part being the weakest.
No.
It's very difficult to see these films as individual pieces. I always say that The Lord of the Rings I see as one story. It's one recurring story that could be watched back to back as one featurette. But Return of the King is the most action-packed. It is the most emotional out of the three.
Yeah.
And it's everything you want from a final installment in a trilogy. It takes all the characters you've come to love through the other two and pits them against the odds. And it's just spectacular to watch. My final thoughts on Lord of the Rings overall. It is when you break it down to the core, it is a very simple plot. It's the enemies aren't. There's no grey moral areas. It is very simply good versus evil. But what I like about it is, and I know we've badmouthed J.R.R. Tolkien, we're not fond of how he writes, but I like the parallels you can draw between his life and the war. And that sense of camaraderie, and loss of friendships, loss of soldiers, and life in general. And I think that's what makes these kind of films strong. Like, you can take the most outrageous landscapes, outrageous mythological monsters and everything, But at the core of it, what makes films like this good is the story and the parallels you can draw to real life.
Yeah.
And the emotions that you go on with these characters. And that, to me, is why Lord of the Rings is my favourite film of all time, is that there is so much connection in terms of friendship and, as I said, camaraderie. And that is what I think is the Lord of the Rings' strongest point as a film series.
Yeah. Well, this is it.
Yeah.
The end of another marathon, and you know, we've just been on the up throughout each of the films. Whereas the Batman marathon, we had our ups, we had our downs. We've just gone straight up because, you know, every film gets better, and you know, it's the end of a legacy as well, I think.
Yeah. 11 years later.
11 years
and
later.
And it still has the same impact.
Yeah. 11 years later, we're getting The Hobbit as well. So I think that's what we'll say is we'll say that, you know, we'll have our Hobbit review coming out, and this marathon, you know, it's been an absolute pleasure to do another marathon, and you expect more marathons in the future. So, without further ado, I bid thee farewell instead of I bid thee welcome. So, thanks for watching another marathon, and thanks for watching our Lord of the Rings, an unexpected marathon. And we'll see you next time. So, rate, comment, subscribe, and all the good stuff. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
It's like in the great films, Mr. Garner. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And how could the critics go back to the way things were when so many bad films had come out? Even these bad films must pass. And when the Oscars shine, they'll shine all the clearer. Those were the films that stayed with you. That meant something, even if you were too small to understand why. But I know now that critics who reviewed those films had loads of chances of turning out, walking out of the cinema, only they didn't. There are good films in this world, Mr. Garner, and they're worth fighting for.